So good morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think one of the things that we just have to keep in our mind is how powerful it is when adults can get together for children, right?
Right.
So I want you to think of some of the most difficult times in getting adults to sit around a table and figure out what's best for kids. Does that happen often in your life? And I don't think there's any agency or any group that is kind of without that stigma. And certainly, and let me just lay it on the page, educators can do it very well. And I think agencies, quote, agencies can do it well. And the biggest move that we can make is to make sure that the work that we do in community schools gets all of the adults at the table for children. And I think that attitude is really what's going to make a difference. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my ideas on how we can support each other in community schools and why I think it's so important. And then I'd like to open it up for some questions or comments or things that you think that we can do as the state ed department. I just want to point out to you, we're working really hard to get those 700 school districts and 3.2 million kids connected to our libraries and our museums. Great resources. All of us know that if we can do that, then communities come together more and people can appreciate those communities. So internally we have some work to do, but yet we have lots of agencies that work in all of our communities across the state. And I think that the perception and the concept of saying, okay, we can together break down the barriers that cause us to be in silos and really work together makes a huge difference. So our agenda is successful students. And you heard earlier our Chancellor Rosa, who I know you know ran the first community school in New York City, very successfully implemented that, and she can become and is an expert, has been used by New York City schools and others on how do we make this all work. While I'm introducing and pointing out that our Chancellor was here and you heard her earlier, I'd also like to introduce our Vice Chancellor, Andrew Brown, is with us. And Dr. Judith Johnson. Judith, are you here?
Here I am.
Yes, Judith Johnson. Judith is from which judicial? Ninth Judicial District. And so we are, as an agency and as the regions, committed to this breakdown of silos to try to make it work. So some of the things that I think that Ave talked a little bit about that I was so pleased to see is that this isn't just about social agencies and other groups coming together and being at a school. This is everybody on the same page saying student achievement and success is what we're all for. So those of you who know what it's like when someone says, well, this is what I do, and that what I do doesn't necessarily match with support for students in their classrooms and making sure that they are better students and better learners, those two things have to come together successfully. So when that happens, we're going to have more college and career-ready students, physically, emotionally, healthy, creative, socially capable, and civilly aware of what their roles are in their communities. If we don't, we aren't going to have the success we could have. Teachers who are very committed people can't do it all. And schools and principals and administrators by themselves can't do it all. But together as communities, our students are the greatest resource that we have. They are the infrastructure that really all of the supports for them have to be supported. But we all recognize, I mean, you're here because you recognize that community schools are a way to get this all done. I am really pleased with the continued support in New York State for community schools. So the last legislative session, $100 million for this coming year was divided up among 225 highest need school districts to encourage them to transform their school sites into community schools. Now I can tell you that's going to look differently in different school districts. Every school district that received funding from that $100 million, they didn't get equal funding. And those that have higher need with more students received more. So some districts might be very small and rural, didn't get a lot, but what they got was specifically identified to go and support the concept of community schools. This isn't something that we can just expect school districts to say, we have all the funding and this is how we're going to do it. This is about building the capacity across districts and communities to support students. It's about building capacities with libraries and museums that are already there, that can focus some of their resources and time on supporting students in their communities. Another point that I think is extremely important is that the legislature last year and this year supported giving funding to our most in-need schools, persistently struggling and struggling schools across the state. And this year, that $75 million that is going to those schools is specifically identified for our community school programs. Let me say not programs because I want to not go the wrong place. I want to say that this is actually systems, and we're working to make sure that that system can support it all. I have had the opportunity to be in a number of schools who would tell you they have community schools. They aren't all the same. And I think the things that we talked about earlier that Abe pointed out on his triangle, I was not a math person, but I thought that was a great visual because I was a reading teacher and I always wanted to have visuals when I was doing work with concepts because people can understand it better. It's really powerful to be able to say that an important part of support for community schools is academic success for kids. Because too often, the kind of simplistic approach is, let's take this and put it into support for a clinic in our campus, or an after-school program. All these disconnected things that on the surface support students, but don't do it in a holistic way that really can make a substantial difference in their lives. We know that kids do better when they're healthy, when they see the board and hear the teacher, when they have someone to help them and support them when there are problems at home. So you think about that, you think about what kind of resources do we have to support the health of our students. It can't be just that, and it can't be something that is separate. They also do better when parents are involved. There's clear research that when parents know their child's teacher, know what their child is doing in that classroom with that teacher, what mathematics that child is learning, that there is more opportunities for them to connect with what they need to do to be successful students. Community schools are all part of this solution. And I would say to you, again, from my first comments, the most important thing we can do is get adults to say, this is what we have to do. We have to loosen up the concept of this is what we do to make it, this is what we need to all do for students in our classrooms and in our schools. This is a major shift. And some places across the state are down the road already and may not have this concept that we know is really going to help. We've got to help them transition to it. And then those that are coming up and thinking, okay, I'm going to start this with my community. We have many community agencies. And I think the power of this is that community agencies work together with school districts to make sure that they all see a common goal for students in that community. They really need that backing from the community, and they need to be focused on what does it mean for success for our students. And let me say that when that happens, you will have communities that care about students, whether they're in the classrooms, whether they're in an after-school or maybe not in an after-school program, whether they have someone to take care of them in the morning when their parents' jobs demand that they leave earlier than school starts, or in the summertime when there are many opportunities for kids to have issues that aren't so positive, that the community rallies around them and supports them. When you talk about how you make this work, it isn't something that is, as I said earlier, it's not the natural thing automatically. We tell principals and their staffs, teachers, you're responsible for what goes on in your classroom or what goes on in your school. This requires principals to have a different sort of view of how they're going to share the leadership and the responsibility in their school, including making sure that teachers are aware of the resources that are available for their students in that school. Again, some of that comes easy for certain people, and others have a difficult time. And so part of the work that I think we need to do in New York, I had a quick conversation with Vice Chancellor on how we might get there. We need to be doing some training for our school staffs and our leadership staff so they see the role they can take in making these things work for our kids across the state. It's, I think, important for you to understand the state education department has been extremely fortunate to have strong interagency and community-based organizational partners willing to assist, but that whole willingness has to be translated into action. And you're here because you want to be part of that. We're here because we want to make sure that can happen. And I think that it's really a critical thing for us to see all of the ways that this can work. Let me just give you one example. Renee Ryder is here with us this morning. Renee led an interagency team from New York to Washington, D.C. last week. They were working with federal agencies to figure out how to improve child health by expanding access to school-based health services for children that are enrolled in Medicaid. Our team included representatives from New York State Ed Department, New York State Department of Health, the Office of Mental Health, New York State Department of Education, New York City's Department of Education, New York City's Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, school superintendents, union representatives, and it was led by our federal partners, U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Health and Human Services, and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. Now you can imagine what that room was filled with, right? Everybody that I just listed doesn't automatically think that they could make it work with other people. They also often don't think, when they're putting together a program for children, that that program for children should somehow be connected to the educational program. So the very fact that Health and Human Services was part of a conversation with state ed or with the Federal Department of Education is a huge move. It's not been done before, and I think that's part of it in saying we really need to get serious about this concept of collaboration. We spend a lot of money in silos. It's not to say that the funding isn't a necessary thing, but we could become so much better if we worked together and shared resources when it was appropriate to make sure that we could support our students better. So I think there's other partners we need to talk about, and there are some of them in the room with us. New York State Council on Children and Families, National Center for Community Schools, who's running this. the New York State Network for Youth Success, NYSIT, who are also here with us today, the New York State School-Based Health Alliance, Children's Aid Society, also part of this, UFT, and the New York City Coalition for Educational Justice. Those are just a few of them. Talk about all these titles, right? Talk about the adults associated with them. We all need to be thinking differently on how we can interact in a positive way to leave some of the restrictions we think we have at the doorway and get together in a room and figure out how to move forward. I think it's always important for us to get our school boards and our local superintendents involved, and I certainly can work with the School Board Association in New York State. In fact, I see you have some school board members. We have the head of the school board from Rochester with us today. It's great to see you, Ben. So I think there are lots of opportunities for us. This is one of those times when the legislature, the governor's office, the agencies themselves are talking about it. My God, we've got the federal government talking about it. Now, what are we going to do? And I think the purpose of this is to come up with a plan, but let's not have this time be wasted, and let's make sure that at least among all the adults in this room, we know how to step back, do what's necessary to support children. So thank you very much. I appreciate my opportunity to come and speak with you today, and I would like to open it up for some questions if you have any, and if I have the answer.
So if you have a question, you can stand and speak. We won't use microphones, just speak loudly.
Yes?
We talked a little bit in our group about, do you believe it's necessary for it to be a neighborhood school to be a successful community school? And what are the positives to having that?
Well, there's no question. I mean, I can speak from my experience. I was in a very, very large district, in a geographically large district. And so it seems in many cases that because of the geographic closeness, if you will, of neighborhood schools and neighborhoods that identify with that school, that it is easier to have people come together around it because it's already ingrained in their personalities and in their approach to what kind of programs or supports they're giving to a school. But I don't think we should limit ourselves to that, because many, many opportunities exist across our cities and our school districts where students may choose schools for specific reasons. We still have opportunities to provide resources for them when they're at school. It's maybe not as easy, but I'll bet you we could find some great models that in fact are selective schools, or that parents select a school for a reason and it's not in their neighborhood, but yet that's a very good thing. So I don't think we should put that restriction on, but I would say that in many cases I've seen it's a little easier to get the community together towards a school if they think of it as their own school.
So I love the way you started your talk with the adults and you ended your talk with the adults, and in the middle you talked about the idea of really getting some training to school staff and to, I guess, the partner staff as well. So I'd love to hear more of your ideas about how you want to go about that and what that might look like.
Well, you know, part of the role that the State Ed Department takes is providing training for both principals, where we do some joint training with the NISCUS organization, which is the school superintendent's organization, as well as administrative organizations. So we do jointly work with them. And as I said, Vice Chancellor and I were talking as we were kind of finishing up the first session and just saying, this is something that we can become more proactive in. So one of the things we could do is, as we're doing training for our principals and our leaders, we could certainly put in a strand that talked about how do you make community schools and partnerships in a community work for you. And I think one thing that we know, that for as many different personalities we have for adults, there are that many different personalities for our own agencies, and for the approach that we have, and for the history that we have. And so I think it's really critical for us to try to figure out ways that we can cross over. I will tell you, some of the best principals probably don't have the concept of community school ingrained in how to be a great leader, because their focus for a very long time has not been on that. It's been on what's happening in their school and what kind of instructional program they have. And I think we've got to widen that definition of how they can really support students in their academic work by making sure that these agencies can support the students in their life. Yes.
I would just like to add, I hope you will have a conversation with all of the deans of the teacher preparation and leadership programs in the state.
Well, and the leadership preparation programs, I think, would be particularly important, right? Teachers do this naturally. Sometimes, sometimes you walk into a school and you see that there are just teachers that automatically think of what can they do to support this student because they're having a hard time in their classroom. So I mean, my view about the role that teachers play in this is really a critical role, and they are like the first connectors very often to what children need. But if they don't have a way to be successful in getting those resources to the families, it's difficult. And very often the leadership of the school is the one that really sets that stage. So I think teachers, I wouldn't be as worried about that, but I think the leadership is a really important part of that.
So I saw 2 hands, so we'll go over here and then here. And those will be our last question. Thank you.
Commissioner, thanks for coming today, and thanks
Sure.
for your advocacy on behalf of community schools. They're very important to our communities. You highlighted a couple of key elements. One was the academic success of kids, which that. Another was the supports. And the third, which you spoke strongly about, was the parent and family engagement, which is often a piece that kind of falls off the table. And the recently State Ed, with the My Brother's Keeper, put out very strong, good guidelines for parent and family engagement. I guess what I'd like to ask is it fair to expect that in the regulatory and oversight roles of State Ed, that we would see the same level of import put on parent and family engagement as we'll see on academics and on the social and emotional supports?
Well, I certainly want it to be that same level, and feel free to comment on it if you don't think it is, because we're really focused on trying to make sure, and especially in our high-need schools, where we do have access to programs that go into those schools as special grants or whatever, that community is very involved, and that community and parent connection is a key part of that. We want to work very hard to make sure that we aren't doing what we don't think is really great everywhere, which is we're putting these grants into separate silos. So Dr. Cheryl Atkinson is with us today. She's going to be on one of your panels. She is working specifically with those very high-need schools. And we want to make sure that there are connections to the community involvement piece, the parent involvement piece, and support for schools to have higher academics. Thank you.
Commissioner, I want to thank you and Regents at the legislature for working together to bring these funding sources to us. Software we are going to be able to launch 13 schools, community school models, strategies in September. So very often I'm asked, is this a one-year funding stream or is there long-term funding commitment? And I share that it seems to be the conversation that this is continuing to move forward, but it would be best if I could share with community members and principals and our Board of Education as well, that this funding will continue throughout the years as it will take time to get through the community to really show the outcomes that we know principals are any thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts on that. So let me point out to you, this was a strong discussion that the Regents had And it came up multiple times. I think we had an extended conversation about it. And I will tell you that we believe that this has to be a continued support across the state. This cannot be a flash in the pan, because when it is, it discourages everyone. And people say, oh, you came, you dropped in something, and then, oh, when that was over, you're gone. And that doesn't pay, and it doesn't support kids, and it doesn't help anybody to get sustained support for children. So we are very committed to making sure that this is in front of the legislature and the governor's office as a key point in continuing support for schools and districts. We have a number of agendas like that. And I'm just, I'm telling you that that collectively, just like collectively we can do more for children, collectively we can do more for this agenda if we speak and show great successes with the monies and the funding that's come out, and that all of us are working together. And I think those are the ways that we can make that happen. But rest assured, I believe that the Regents will be a strong voice in support for continued funding in this area, and that that we need to, and not anticipate that the state's going to provide all of the funding, but that this has to be one of those things that we just know it helps our kids in the state of New York, and it's got to be there. We have one more? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Hi, I'm with Rochester's Community Foundation, and I couldn't agree more, and I'm sure none of us would agree any less, that success is going to breed the ongoing capacity to have the funding. But success in something like community schools and success in so many other education matters requires turning very large ships in the middle of a very broad ocean. Meaning that 1 year of funding, 2 years of funding, even 3, isn't going to give us the capacity necessarily to accomplish the successes that will win enduring funding. So we have to cut that vicious cycle somewhere in there. And let me, if I may, go back to how you opened your presentation. Thank you. Yours is a leadership based on interagency collaboration. I think it's the collaboration of the state and the local districts in ensuring that we have the resources and the time to be able to implement the change in a locally sustainable way that's going to ensure that we're going to be able to give you the data you need, the fodder you need to be able to win legislative or budgetary approval for continued funding.
Well, so let me tell you, I understand that people don't flip on a dime. Schools don't. They can be working very hard, and we're seeing that in some of our schools that that have kind of the greatest distance to strive forward. We're seeing that change is there. It's not done overnight, and people need to realize that you don't change agencies, no matter who they're associated with, the state ed or any of the other governor's agencies in Albany. Those don't change overnight. So I think it's realistic to have outcomes that you see at the end of the first year that you will have in place, and you can show that there's been growth. I think that then helps to create what are we going to do, and what are the outcomes we need for our second year, and all of those things have to be part of the narrative on this is the work that we're doing. This takes time, and this takes us breaking down those barriers and making sure that everybody's working together. I brought up a number of times the poverty initiative that you all have in Rochester. I think that's a great beginning of getting people together at the table. And everybody's got to be there and be equally committed. But that is an excellent first step. But you've got to identify the outcomes that you're going to have at the end of this first year. You have a new leader in your superintendent. I think that you can start this whole conversation and go at full speed because you have some of the foundational work done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I follow up with that for just 1 sec?
Sure.
In Rochester, We have both a steering committee for the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, and we have a state task force that the governor convened of his cabinet. Notably, because you're an independent actor, the State Department of Education is not part of Rochester's anti-poverty task force.
Well, feel free to invite us.
All right.